The wind cut through the alley like a knife, sharp and cold, biting at every bit of skin it could find. Snow had started falling an hour ago, soft at first, then heavier, sticking to the cracked pavement and piling up in the corners where trash bags had burst open. 12-year-old Lena pulled her thin jacket tighter around her shoulders, her breath puffing out in little clouds as she moved quickly, eyes scanning the ground. She wasn't looking for toys or lost coins. She was looking for food. It was past 8 at night and the city hummed with distant traffic and muffled music from bars a few blocks away. But here, in the narrow alley behind La Luna restaurant, it was quiet except for the occasional clatter of a dumpster lid or the scurry of a rat. Lena knew this place well. She came here 3 or 4 times a week, always after closing time when the kitchen staff had gone home and the back door was locked tight. Sometimes, if she was lucky, they'd leave out trays of unsold meals, still warm, still wrapped in a clean bin marked donations. Other times, she had to dig deeper, sorting through bags with gloved hands, one glove missing, the other held together with duct tape, to find anything edible. A half loaf of bread, a container of rice, maybe even a piece of fruit that wasn't too bruised. Tonight, the donation bin was empty. Again. Her stomach growled, but she didn't let it slow her down. She moved to the next dumpster, the one with the dented side and the broken latch. She'd learned how to open it without making too much noise, lift the lid just enough, slip her arm in, feel around. Her fingers brushed against something soft, a plastic container. She pulled it out. Inside, leftover pasta with mushrooms still covered in sauce. Not perfect, but good enough. She tucked it into her backpack, already half full with other finds. A bag of day-old rolls from the bakery down the street. A carton of milk that expired yesterday but still smelled fine. She didn't think of herself as poor. She didn't think of herself as lucky either. She just thought of herself as responsible. Ever since her mom got sick and then didn't wake up one morning 2 years ago, everything had fallen on her. Her grandmother, Abuela Rosa, had taken her in, but Abuela's diabetes had gotten worse and now she spent most days in bed, her legs swollen, her voice weak. The little apartment they shared, a single room above a laundromat, was paid for with money from odd jobs Abuela used to do, but those had dried up months ago. Now it was up to Lena to keep them fed, to make sure Abuela took her medicine, to lie to the landlord when he knocked asking for rent. Lena wasn't bitter. She was just tired. Tired in her bones, tired in her mind. But she never cried in front of Abuela. Never let her see the fear. She zipped up her backpack and turned to leave the alley. The snow was falling harder now, dusting her dark hair and melting on her cheeks. She needed to get home before it got too late. The walk was only 15 minutes, but the streets got rougher after dark. People shouting, cars slowing down too close to the curb, men with too much to drink stumbling out of bars. She kept her head down, hands in her pockets, steps quick but quiet. Halfway down the alley, something caught her eye. Not trash. Not a stray cat, a shape, a person. At first, she thought it was someone passed out, maybe a regular from the bar around the corner. She almost walked past. But then she saw the car. It was a sleek black sedan tilted sideways against the brick wall, front end crumpled like paper. Steam rose from under the hood, hissing into the cold air. The driver's door was open, and lying just a few feet away, half in the snow, half on the wet pavement, was a man in a dark coat that looked expensive. Wool, maybe, with a silk lining peeking out where it had torn. His face was turned away, but she could see blood on his temple, dark against his pale skin. Her heart jumped. She froze. No one else was around. The alley was empty. The restaurant lights were off. Even the street lamp at the end flickered, casting long, shaky shadows. She should run, call for help from a safe distance. But something made her step closer. The man wasn't moving. She crouched down, careful not to touch him too much. "Sir?" she whispered. "Can you hear me?" No answer. She checked his breathing, shallow but there. His pulse, when she pressed 2 fingers to his wrist, was weak but steady. Good. He was alive. But he needed help. Fast. Lena looked around again. No phones in her pocket. Hers had died weeks ago, and she couldn't afford to charge it. No one nearby. She couldn't carry him. She couldn't leave him. Then she remembered Mr. Chen, the owner of the little grocery store 2 blocks over. He stayed open late. And he had a phone. She acted fast. She pulled off her scarf, thin, frayed at the edges but clean, and pressed it gently against the cut on his head. "Hold on," she said, more to herself than to him. "Just hold on." She ran, her boots slapped against the wet pavement, snow flying behind her. She didn't stop until she burst into Mr. Chen's store, breathless, eyes wide. "Please," she gasped, leaning on the counter. "There's a man in the alley behind La Luna. He's hurt, bad car crash." Mr. Chen didn't ask questions. He'd seen Lena around for months. Knew she lived with her sick grandmother, knew she never stole, always paid what she could. He nodded, grabbed his coat, and dialed 911 from behind the counter while she stood there, shivering, her hands stained with blood. When the operator answered, Mr. Chen gave the address, described the scene. Then he handed the phone to Lena. "Tell them what you saw." Her voice shook, but she spoke clearly. "He's not waking up. There's blood, but he's breathing." She gave them everything, the color of the car, where he was lying, that he was alone. The ambulance came in under 6 minutes. 2 paramedics rushed in with a stretcher and a medical bag. Lena led them back to the alley, her heart pounding the whole way. They worked quickly, checking vitals, stabilizing his neck, loading him onto the stretcher. One of them turned to her. "You stayed with him?" She nodded. "You probably saved his life, kid." She didn't feel like a hero. She just felt cold, and hungry, and worried about Abuela, who'd be wondering where she was. Before they closed the ambulance doors, she stepped forward. The man's eyes were still closed, but his hand was loose at his side. Without thinking, she took it, just for a second, and whispered, "You're gonna be okay." Then she stepped back, watching as the red and blue lights flashed against the snow-covered bricks. The siren wailing as the ambulance pulled away. Mr. Chen walked her home. He didn't say much, just carried her backpack and made sure she didn't slip on the ice. At her building, he handed her a small paper bag. "For you and your abuela," he said. Inside, 2 warm empanadas, a carton of juice, and a chocolate bar. She thanked him quietly, then climbed the creaky stairs to their room. Abuela was awake, sitting up in bed, wrapped in an old quilt. "Where were you, mija?" she asked, voice soft but worried. Lena set down her backpack, pulled out the pasta container, and started heating it on their single-burner stove. "Just running an errand," she said, forcing a small smile. "Found dinner." She didn't mention the car, the blood, the man in the expensive coat. She didn't want to scare Abuela, and maybe deep down she didn't want to think about it either. It was just another thing in a long list of things she couldn't control. But as she stirred the pasta, watching the steam rise in the dim light, she couldn't stop seeing his face, the pale skin, the blood, the way he hadn't moved. She wondered who he was, if he had family, if anyone was waiting for him. She didn't know his name, didn't know if he'd live or die. All she knew was that she'd done what felt right, and that, for now, was enough. Later, after Abuela had eaten and fallen back asleep, Lena sat by the window, looking out at the snow-covered street. The city was quiet again, peaceful almost. She wrapped Mr. Chen's scarf back around her neck, still faintly stained with blood, and whispered to the dark, "Please be okay." Somewhere, miles away in a hospital room, a man with no memory of his name would wake up hours later, confused and alone, except for the faint scent of cinnamon and the strange, comforting echo of a child's voice saying, "You're gonna be okay." And though neither of them knew it yet, their lives had just become tangled together in a way neither could have imagined. The hospital smelled like soap and something sharp, like metal and medicine mixed together. Fluorescent lights buzzed overhead, too bright, too loud. The man in the bed didn't know his own name. He knew pain. His leg was wrapped in a hard cast, his head throbbed like a drum, but everything else was fog. Faces came and went. Nurses in pale blue scrubs, a doctor with tired eyes, a police officer who asked questions he couldn't answer. "Do you remember your address? Your phone number? Anyone who might be looking for you?" He shook his head. Each movement sent a spike of pain through his temple. They called him John Doe on the charts. No wallet, no phone. Just an expensive watch, now missing, and a coat with no labels. The car had been registered to a private company, but without ID, they couldn't connect him to it. Days passed. He drifted in and out of sleep, haunted by fragments. A child's voice, snow falling, the smell of something warm, bread maybe, and a feeling of being safe even though he was hurt. Then on the 4th morning, a woman in a crisp black suit walked in, followed by a younger man holding a tablet. She looked around the room like she owned it, then softened when she saw him. "Thank God," she said, her voice cracking just a little. "We've been looking everywhere." She was his assistant, his right hand for over a decade. She explained everything: the crash, the missing wallet, the frantic search. His name came back to him slowly like a song half remembered. Arthur Kensington. Founder of a software company. Widower. Father to a daughter who died years ago in a car accident. Also on a winter night. Also alone. He closed his eyes. The grief was still there, buried but never gone. And now another crash. Another winter. Another life hanging in the balance. But there was one detail that stuck in his mind, repeated by the police and the hospital staff. A young girl had found him. Stayed with him. Called for help. No one knew who she was except that she gave a name, Lena, and an address, the Hope Haven shelter on 14th Street. Arthur didn't say much that first week. He healed, he signed papers. He took calls from lawyers and board members. But every night, before sleep pulled him under, he thought of that voice, that small, steady presence in the cold. 2 weeks after the crash, he insisted on leaving the hospital, even though his leg wasn't ready. He sat in a wheelchair wrapped in a thick coat someone had brought from his penthouse and told his assistant, "Take me to the shelter." She hesitated. "Sir, it's not safe. It's not your world. I owe her my life," he said quietly. "I need to see her." So they went. The Hope Haven shelter was a converted church with peeling paint and a sign that read, "All are welcome," in faded letters. Inside it was warm but crowded. Mattresses lined the floor of the main room. Families huddled under blankets. Kids played quietly with worn-out toys. The smell of soup and damp clothes hung in the air. Arthur felt out of place instantly. His coat alone probably cost more than most people here made in a month. He kept his head down, letting his assistant do the talking. They found Lena in the back corner, sitting on a thin mattress next to an older woman wrapped in layers of shawls. The girl looked up when they approached, eyes wide, guarded. She didn't smile. Didn't stand. Just watched. Arthur's throat tightened. She was so small. Her shoes were scuffed, her jeans too short, her hair pulled back in a messy braid. But her eyes, sharp, serious, full of a kind of quiet strength he hadn't seen in years. "You're the one," he said, his voice rough. She nodded once. "I'm Arthur. I wanted to thank you." She glanced at the older woman, her grandmother, he guessed, then back at him. "You don't have to," she said. Anyone would have done it. But they both knew that wasn't true. People walked past accidents all the time, looked away, pretended not to see. Arthur didn't know what to say next. He'd prepared speeches in his head, offers of money, promises of help. But now, face to face with her, it all felt wrong. Too big, too loud, so he just said, "Are you okay?" She blinked, surprised. No one ever asked her that. "Yeah," she said softly. "We're okay." Her grandmother spoke then, her voice thin but clear. "God put her there that night. That's all I know." She reached out and patted Lena's hand. "She's got a good heart." Arthur felt something shift inside him, something he hadn't felt in a long time. Not pity. Not guilt, just connection. He left without making a scene. But the next day he sent a discreet payment to the shelter, enough to cover Lena and her grandmother's stay for 3 months, plus medical co-pays for the older woman's diabetes. He didn't leave a note, didn't ask for thanks. He just wanted them to be safe. Still, he couldn't stop thinking about them. A week later he returned, this time with groceries, rice, beans, canned vegetables, fruit, even a small carton of milk. He knocked on the door of the tiny room they'd been moved to, a step up from the main floor thanks to his anonymous payment. Lena opened the door, eyes narrowing when she saw him. "You again?" "I brought food," he said simply, holding up the bags. She hesitated, then stepped aside. Inside, the room was bare except for 2 cots, a small table, and a hot plate in the corner. But it was clean, neat, loved. Her grandmother was sitting up, sipping tea. She smiled when she saw him. "You're back." "I couldn't stay away," he admitted. Over the next few visits, a routine formed. He'd come on Sundays, always with something. A book he thought Lena might like. A warm blanket, once even a pair of new boots that fit her perfectly. She never said thank you out loud, but she'd nod or offer him a cup of weak tea, or show him a math problem she'd solved. He learned she was in 7th grade, top of her class, Walked 2 miles to school every day no matter the weather. She read library books under streetlights when the electricity got cut off. She never complained. Not once. One afternoon, as they sat at the small table eating soup he'd brought, he asked, "What do you want to be when you grow up?" She stirred her spoon slowly. "A doctor." "Why?" "Because people like Abuela shouldn't have to choose between food and medicine." She looked up at him, direct and unflinching. "And because someone should be there when no one else is." He felt those words like a punch to the chest. He started visiting more often, not just Sundays. Sometimes after work in the evening. He'd bring his laptop, show her how to use it, help her with science projects. She was quick, asked smart questions, remembered everything. He taught her chess. She beat him by the third game. He never mentioned money, never offered to fix her life. But he watched, listened, noticed when her grandmother's cough got worse, when the lights flickered, when Lena came home with wet socks because her shoes had holes. One day, he found a landlord's notice taped to their door. Rent overdue. Pay in 72 hours or vacate. He didn't say anything to Lena. That night he called a real estate contact. Found a small, clean one-bedroom apartment just 10 blocks away. Affordable, safe, close to her school and a clinic. He paid the first 3 months' rent and deposit in cash under a fake name and left the keys with the building manager. When Lena and her grandmother moved in 2 days later, they were stunned. "It's a miracle," her grandmother whispered, tears in her eyes. Lena wasn't so sure. She looked around the apartment, the working stove, the real bed, the window that didn't rattle in the wind, and then looked at Arthur, who'd come by just to check in. "Did you do this?" she asked, arms crossed. He didn't lie. "I helped make it happen." "Why?" Her voice wasn't angry. "Just confused. You don't even know us." "I know enough," he said gently. "I know you saved my life. And I know you deserve more than scraps and fear." She didn't hug him, didn't cry. But she let him stay for dinner that night. Real dinner, cooked on a real stove. And for the first time she laughed at one of his bad jokes. After that, things changed. Not all at once, but slowly, like ice melting in spring. She started calling him Mr. K instead of you. She'd wave when she saw his car pull up. She even let him walk her to school one morning when it rained. He in turn stopped dressing like a CEO when he visited. Wore jeans, brought donuts. Sat on the floor to help her build a volcano for science class. One evening, as they sat on the fire escape watching the sunset, she asked, "Did you have kids?" He went very still, then nodded. "A daughter. Her name was Elena. Like me, almost. With an A at the end. She passed away?" "Yes, a long time ago. Car accident." Lena didn't say anything for a long time. Then she whispered, "I'm sorry." He looked at her, really looked. Saw not just a girl who'd saved him, but a child who understood loss in a way most adults never would. "I'm sorry too," he said, "for all of it." They sat in silence after that, the city humming below them, the sky turning pink and gold. He didn't tell her then that he'd started thinking about something bigger, something permanent. But the idea was growing inside him, quiet and sure, like a seed finally finding soil. Because for the first time in years, he didn't feel alone. And for the first time in her short, hard life, neither did she. He left that night with a full heart and a promise to himself. He wouldn't just help them survive. He'd help them thrive, but he'd do it slowly, carefully. Because trust, he was learning, wasn't given, it was earned, one small act at a time. And Lena? She watched him drive away, then went inside, hugged her grandmother tight and whispered, "I think he's one of the good ones." Abuela smiled. "Some people find their family twice in life, mija. Maybe this is your second chance." Lena didn't answer. But that night, for the first time in a long time, she slept without dreaming of empty cupboards or hospital bills. She dreamed of a quiet man with kind eyes. And a voice that said, "You're safe now." Life in the new apartment settled like warm bread rising. Slowly, quietly, but surely. The walls didn't leak. The heat stayed on. There was a real kitchen with a stove that didn't hiss like an angry cat, and a tiny balcony where Lena could sit and watch the world go by without worrying someone would yell at her for loitering. Most nights she'd come home from school, drop her backpack by the door, and find a note on the counter. Leftovers in the fridge. Mr. K or new library books on the table. Don't stay up too late. Sometimes there'd be a chocolate bar tucked under the note, her favorite kind, the one with almonds. She never asked how he knew. She just accepted it like sunshine after a long storm. Her grandmother, stronger now that her medicine was consistent and her meals were regular, spent her days tending to a small windowsill garden. Basil, mint, a stubborn little tomato plant that refused to die. She'd hum old songs while she watered them, her hands steady for the first time in years, and every Sunday without fail Mr. K came by, not as a billionaire, not as a stranger, but as someone who belonged, someone who brought groceries, fixed the wobbly cabinet door, and sat on the floor playing chess with Lena until her grandmother shooed them both to the table for dinner. He never pushed. Never acted like he owned them or their time. He just showed up. And that, more than anything, made Lena trust him. One rainy afternoon in early spring, he arrived with a surprise. A second-hand laptop, wiped clean, loaded with school programs and a few harmless games. "For your science project," he said, setting it on the kitchen table like it was nothing. "And for everything else you'll need." Lena stared at it like it might vanish. "You can't," he interrupted gently. "And you will. You're too smart to be writing essays by hand in the dark." She didn't argue. That night, she stayed up until 2 a.m. typing a report on the human circulatory system. Her fingers clumsy at first, then faster, surer. When she printed it the next day at school, her teacher's eyes widened. "This is college-level work, Lena." She just smiled and said, "I had help." But the truth was she was doing it all on her own, with a little light to guide her. As weeks turned into months, something else changed too. Mr. K started asking questions, not about her past, but about her future. "What kind of doctor do you want to be?" He'd ask while chopping onions for soup. "Pediatrics," she'd say without hesitation. Kids don't get a say in what happens to them. "I want to be the one who listens." He'd nod. Like that made perfect sense. One Saturday, he took her to the public library, not the one near the shelter, but the big downtown branch with tall windows and quiet reading rooms. He didn't hover, just pointed to the science section and said, "I'll be in history if you need me." She spent 2 hours lost in books about anatomy, space, even ancient medicine. When she found him, he was reading a thick book about sailing, something about his daughter having loved the ocean. They didn't talk about it. But she sat beside him, shoulder barely touching his, and read her own book in silence. It felt like family. Then came the day the school counselor called. Lena had missed a parent-teacher conference again because Abuela had a bad day and couldn't leave the apartment. The counselor left a message. "We need a legal guardian present for certain forms. Please arrange this soon." Lena didn't tell Mr. K right away. She tried to figure it out herself, asked a neighbor if they'd sign, but they said no, too risky. She lay awake that night, stomach in knots. Without a guardian, she couldn't join the science fair, couldn't apply for advanced classes, couldn't even go on field trips. The next time Mr. K came by, she was quiet. He noticed. He always did. "What's wrong?" he asked over dinner. Spaghetti this time, sauce from a jar but warmed with garlic and love. She pushed her noodles around her plate. "School stuff," she mumbled. He waited. Didn't press. Just sipped his water and let the silence fill the space between them. Finally, she looked up. "They need someone, official, to sign things. For me." He set his fork down. "I see. I know it's not your job," she rushed on. "And I don't want to be a burden." "You're not a burden," he said firmly. "You never have been." She swallowed hard. "But you're not family." He was quiet for a long moment. Outside, a bird chirped on the fire escape. Abuela was dozing in her chair, wrapped in a shawl. "Family isn't just blood," he said softly. "Sometimes it's who shows up when no one else will." She looked at him, eyes wide. "I've been thinking about this," he admitted. "For a while now. I'd like to become your legal guardian. Officially. So you never have to worry about forms or rent or whether you'll have a place to sleep. So you can focus on being a kid and becoming that doctor." Lena's breath caught. It wasn't just about paperwork. It was about belonging, about someone choosing her, but... "What about Abuela?" she whispered. "She'd stay with us," he said immediately. "Always. This isn't about replacing anyone. It's about adding to what you already have." Tears pricked her eyes, but she blinked them back. "Why?" she asked again. The same question she'd asked months ago, but now it meant something deeper. Why us? He reached across the table, not touching her, but close enough that she could feel the warmth of his hand. Because the night you found me in that alley, you didn't see a rich man. You saw a person who needed help, and you gave it without expecting anything back. That kind of heart. It's rare, and it deserves to be protected. She didn't say yes right away. She needed to talk to Abuela, needed to think. But that night after Mr. K left, she sat on the edge of her grandmother's bed and told her everything. Abuela listened, her eyes soft. He's a good man, she said finally. Not perfect, but good. And he sees you, mija. Really sees you. I'm scared, Lena admitted. Of course you are, Abuela said, patting her hand. But sometimes the bravest thing you can do is let someone love you. The next week, Mr. K came with papers. Not final adoption papers, just temporary guardianship to start. Simple, clean, no fancy words. He explained every line. Gave her time. Let her ask questions. She signed. And just like that, her world shifted. Not with a bang, but with a quiet click, like a key turning in a long-locked door. Things didn't change overnight. She still walked to school, still did her homework at the kitchen table. But now when she got home, there was always a light on, and sometimes a note that said, "Proud of you." Then one warm evening in late May, everything changed again. Abuela had been tired all day, more than usual. She'd barely touched her lunch, just sat by the window, watching the pigeons. Lena made her tea, fluffed her pillows, read to her from the newspaper. But by nightfall, her breathing was shallow, her skin cool. Call him, Abuela whispered, gripping Lena's hand. Please. Lena dialed Mr. K with shaking fingers. He was there in 20 minutes, still in his work clothes, hair messy from running. He didn't say much. Just sat on the other side of Abuela's bed, holding her other hand, murmuring soft words in Spanish, phrases he'd picked up from listening to them over the months. Abuela smiled. You learned, she said weakly. For you, he replied. She closed her eyes. Take care of my girl. I will, he promised. With everything I have. And then quietly, peacefully, she was gone. Lena didn't scream. Didn't collapse. She just sat there holding her grandmother's hand. Tears streaming down her face like silent rain. Mr. K wrapped an arm around her shoulders, not pulling, just anchoring her to the earth so she wouldn't float away. They stayed like that for hours until the sky turned gray with dawn. The funeral was small. Just Lena, Mr. K, the priest from the old shelter, and two neighbors who'd known Abuela for years. Lena wore the only dress she owned, a simple blue one Abuela had saved for special days. She held her grandmother's rosary the whole time, the beads smooth from years of prayer. Afterward, back at the apartment, everything felt too quiet, too empty. Mr. K didn't try to fill the silence with words. He made soup, washed the dishes, sat with her on the couch while she stared at the wall. That night, she couldn't sleep. She wandered into the living room and found him on the balcony, looking out at the city lights. He didn't turn when she stepped outside. Just patted the space beside him, she sat. The air was warm. Crickets sang in a nearby tree. I don't know how to do this, she said finally, voice raw. Be alone. You're not alone, he said. But Abuela's gone, and it's just us, he nodded. It is, and that's okay. We'll figure it out together. She looked at him then, not as the man she'd saved, not as the rich stranger, but as the person who'd stayed, who'd shown up, who'd loved her grandmother in her final hours like she was his own. Do you ever stop missing them? She asked. No, he said softly, but you learn to carry them with you. In here, he tapped his chest, and in the things you do that would make them proud. She thought about that. Then she reached into her pocket and pulled out the rosary. She'd want you to have this, she said, pressing it into his hand. She trusted you. He closed his fingers around it, his eyes glistening. Thank you. They sat in silence again, the city humming below them, the stars watching from above. Inside, the apartment was empty of Abuela's voice, her songs, her smell of cinnamon and medicine. But it wasn't empty of love, because love, Lena was starting to understand, wasn't a place or a person. It was a choice. And Mr. K had chosen her, again and again. And maybe, just maybe, she could choose to trust him with her heart too. Not all at once, but piece by piece, like building a home from scraps, carefully, patiently, with hope as the foundation. The days after the funeral moved like slow water, quiet, heavy, but always flowing forward. The apartment felt too big now, even though it was just one bedroom. Lena kept Abuela's shawl draped over the back of her chair, her little tomato plant still on the windowsill, watered every morning like a promise. She didn't cry much during the day. She went to school, turned in her assignments, even raised her hand in science class when no one else would. But at night, curled under her thin blanket, she'd press her face into the pillow and let the tears come. Silent, hot, endless. Mr. K didn't try to fix it. He just stayed close. He made dinner every night, even if it was just scrambled eggs and toast. He left the living room light on when he knew she'd be up late studying. And every evening, without fail, he'd knock softly on her door and say, "You okay?" She'd nod, or sometimes just whisper, "Yeah." And he'd nod back and go sit on the couch with a book, staying within earshot in case she needed him. One Saturday, about 3 weeks after Abuela passed, he came by with a duffel bag and a quiet suggestion. "I've got a place by the lake," he said. "Just a small house, quiet. No neighbors for a quarter mile. Want to get out of the city for a couple days?" Lena hesitated. She'd never been anywhere but the neighborhood, the school, the shelter, the alley. The idea of leaving even for a weekend felt strange, like stepping off solid ground. But then she looked around the apartment, saw Abuela's empty chair, felt the silence press in. "Okay," she said. They drove north for 2 hours, past factories and suburbs and fields turning green with spring. The car was quiet but not uncomfortable. Mr. K played soft music, old songs Abuela used to hum, and sometimes pointed out a hawk circling overhead or a field full of wildflowers. Lena watched the world blur by the window, her forehead resting against the cool glass. When they arrived, the house was nothing like she expected. No mansion, no fancy gates, just a wooden cottage with white paint peeling at the edges, a porch with 2 rocking chairs and a view of the lake stretching out like a sheet of silver under the afternoon sun. Inside, it was simple. A kitchen with a cast-iron stove, a living room with a stone fireplace, and 2 small bedrooms. "It was my daughter's favorite place," he said, setting down the bags. "We used to come here every summer." Lena didn't say anything. She just walked to the window and looked out at the water. That night, after a dinner of grilled fish and corn on the cob, cooked over an open flame outside, they sat on the porch as the sky turned from orange to deep blue. Fireflies blinked in the tall grass. The air smelled like pine and wet earth. For a long time, neither spoke. Then so softly it almost got lost in the breeze, Mr. K said, "Her name was Elena." Lena turned to look at him. His eyes were fixed on the lake, but his hands were clenched in his lap. "She was 12, he continued, voice rough. "Same age you are now. We'd been fighting that morning, silly thing about bedtime. I told her to go to her room. She slammed the door. I didn't say I love you before she left." He took a shaky breath. She was riding her bike to her friend's house. A truck ran a red light. She didn't make it to the hospital. Lena's chest tightened. She thought of the alley, the blood, the way he hadn't moved, how close he'd come to not making it either. "I spent years blaming myself," he went on. "If I'd driven her, if I'd hugged her, if I'd just been kinder that morning. After she died, I shut everyone out. Built walls so high even I couldn't climb over them. Made money, lost friends, forgot how to laugh. I thought if I stopped feeling, the pain would go away." He finally looked at her. His eyes were wet but steady. "But then you found me in that alley, cold, broken, alone, and you didn't run. You stayed. You held my hand. You whispered like you actually cared whether I lived or died." His voice cracked. "And in that moment, I saw her. Not exactly, but the same age, the same courage, the same quiet strength. And I realized something. I can't bring her back. But maybe I can still do right by someone who needs me." Lena felt tears well up, but she didn't wipe them away. "I'm not her," she said gently. "No," he agreed. "You're not. You're Lena. And that's why I'm telling you this. Because I don't want you to think I'm trying to replace her with you or you with her. You're your own person. Brave, smart, stubborn as hell." He managed a small smile. "But saving me that night, it gave me a second chance. A chance to be the kind of man my daughter would have been proud of. A chance to love someone the way I should have loved her, with my whole heart every single day." Lena looked down at her hands. She thought of all the times she'd wondered why he kept coming back. Why he cared. Now she knew. You don't have to be perfect, she said quietly. Abuela used to say God doesn't ask for perfect, just present. He let out a soft laugh, but it sounded like relief. Then I'll keep showing up. They sat in silence after that, listening to the waves lap against the shore. The stars came out one by one until the whole sky was glittering. The next morning they walked down to the water's edge. Mr. K carried a small wooden box. He didn't explain what was inside, but Lena didn't ask. When they reached a flat rock near the shore, he opened it. Inside were ashes, gray, fine, peaceful. He knelt and let a handful drift into the wind. It scattered over the water, catching the sunlight like tiny sparks. This is where she loved, he said. So this is where I bring her back. Lena stood beside him, her heart full in a way she couldn't name. She wasn't replacing anyone, and he wasn't trying to fix his past through her. They were just two people, hurting, healing, choosing each other in the quiet moments when it mattered most. Back at the house, over pancakes and hot chocolate, he slid a folder across the table. I've been talking to a lawyer, he said, about making things official, not just guardianship. Adoption. Lena froze, her spoon halfway to her mouth. I know it's a lot, he said quickly, and you don't have to decide now, or ever, if you're not ready. But I want you to know this isn't charity. It's not about money or fixing your life. It's about family. And if you'll have me, I'd be honored to be your dad. The word hung in the air. Dad. So simple, so huge. Lena had never called anyone that. Her own father had left before she could walk. She'd grown up with Abuela's love, but never a father's. She looked at him, really looked. Saw the lines around his eyes from years of grief. The way his hands trembled slightly when he was nervous. The quiet way he always made sure her chair was pulled out before she sat down. You'd really do that? She asked. For real? For real, he said. No conditions. No expectations, just us. She thought about Abuela's last words. Take care of my girl. She thought about the alley, the snow, the blood on her scarf. She thought about all the nights he'd sat on the couch just so she wouldn't feel alone. And she thought about the future, not just surviving, but living. Going to college, becoming a doctor, having someone to call when she was scared or proud or just needed to hear a familiar voice. She didn't say yes right then. She asked questions about school, about keeping Abuela's things, about whether she'd still be Lena Morales or if her name would change. He answered everyone patiently, honestly. I'll always be who I am, she said finally. And I wouldn't want you any other way, he replied. That night, before bed, she stood in the doorway of her room, the one with the view of the lake, and said, I think I'd like that. He didn't hug her too tight. Didn't make a big deal. Just nodded, eyes shining, and said, Good, me too. The next day they packed up and drove back to the city. But something had shifted. The silence in the car wasn't heavy anymore. It was calm, safe. When they got home, Lena went straight to Abuela's chair. She picked up the shawl, held it to her face for a long moment, then folded it carefully and put it in her closet. Next to the rosary Mr. K now kept in his pocket. She didn't feel like she was losing Abuela. She felt like she was carrying her forward, into a new chapter, with someone who understood what it meant to love someone you almost lost. And for the first time since that icy night in the alley, Lena didn't just feel saved, she felt chosen. The morning of her 13th birthday dawned soft and golden, the kind of spring day that felt like a promise. Sunlight spilled through the kitchen window, warming the floor where Lena sat cross-legged, flipping through a library book about the human heart. She'd woken early, not because she was excited, birthdays had never been a big deal, but because the apartment felt different lately, lighter, like the walls themselves were breathing easier. Mr. K, no, Dad, she was trying to get used to that word, was already in the kitchen, humming off-key while flipping pancakes. He'd been doing that more often lately, little songs, silly jokes, leaving notes that said things like, proud of you for acing that quiz. Or sis, don't forget your jacket, it's chilly. It still surprised her, how normal it all felt now. Like this was always how life was supposed to be. He turned, spatula in hand, and grinned when he saw her. Happy birthday, kiddo. She smiled back, small but real. Thanks. He set a plate in front of her. 3 pancakes, a pat of butter melting in the center, a drizzle of real maple syrup. Not the cheap kind, the good stuff. No big party, he said, sitting across from her with his own plate. Just us, unless you want something else? She shook her head. This is perfect, and it was. No noise, no strangers, no pretending. Just pancakes, quiet talk, and the sound of birds outside the window. After breakfast, he handed her a small wrapped box. Plain brown paper, twine tied in a bow. Inside was a silver locket. Not fancy, but delicate. She opened it. On one side, a tiny photo of Abuela smiling in her garden. On the other, a blank space. For when you're ready, he said softly, or for whatever matters most to you. She fastened it around her neck right away. It felt warm against her skin like a hug. Later that afternoon, they drove back to the lake house. Not for sadness this time, but for celebration. He'd strung fairy lights along the porch, set up a small table with cupcakes and lemonade, and even brought her favorite book to read in the hammock. As the sun dipped low, painting the sky in streaks of pink and orange, they sat on the dock, feet dangling over the water. Lena kicked her legs gently, watching ripples spread across the surface. I keep thinking about that night, she said suddenly. In the alley, he nodded. Me too. I didn't know who you were. I just saw someone who needed help. And that's why it mattered, he said. You didn't see a rich man. You saw a person. That's rare, she looked at him then, really looked. Saw the lines around his eyes, the way his hair was starting to gray at the temples, the quiet strength in his hands. This man who'd lost so much yet still chose to open his heart again. I used to think kindness was weakness, she admitted. Like if you were nice, people would take advantage. But Abuela always said kindness is courage with skin on it. He smiled. She was right. They sat in comfortable silence for a while, listening to the water lap against the shore. Crickets began their evening song. Fireflies blinked in the tall grass. Then, as the first stars appeared, he turned to her. His expression was soft, serious, full of something she couldn't quite name. Can I tell you something? He asked. She nodded. He took her hands in his, calloused from years of scavenging, now slowly softening, and leaned closer so only she could hear. His voice was barely above a whisper, warm and steady like a heartbeat. You didn't just save my life that night, mija. You gave me back my heart. The words hit her like a wave, gentle but deep. She felt them in her chest, in her throat, behind her eyes. And then the tears came. Not the sad, lonely tears she'd cried after Abuela passed. These were different, full, overflowing. Tears of being seen, of being loved, of finally belonging. She didn't try to stop them. She just leaned into him, and he wrapped his arms around her like a promise, like he'd never let go. They stayed like that for a long time, under the wide-open sky, the lake holding their silence like a secret. Back in the city, life didn't magically become easy. School was still hard. Some kids still whispered about her past. There were still bills, still worries, still nights when old fears crept in. But now when she felt lost, she had someone to call, someone who'd answer no matter the hour. A few months later, the adoption was finalized. No fanfare, just a quiet courthouse visit, a judge's kind smile, and a new birth certificate with 2 names at the bottom, hers and his. That night, they ordered pizza and watched a movie on the couch, the kind with talking animals and silly jokes. Halfway through, he paused it and said, You know, I used to think my life was over after I lost her. My daughter, but you showed me that love doesn't end. It just finds new places to grow. She leaned her head on his shoulder. I'm glad you found me. I'm glad you found me, he said. As the months turned into a year, Lena settled into a rhythm that felt like home. She joined the school science club, started tutoring younger kids in math, saved every allowance dollar for college, and every night without fail he'd knock on her door before bed and say, You okay? She'd say yes, and he'd say good night, sweetheart, and she'd finally answer, Good night, Dad. She kept Abuela's rosary in her top drawer, next to her report cards and a photo of the 2 of them smiling on a rare sunny day. She still made arroz con leche on Sundays, just the way Abuela taught her, and always set aside a small bowl for her. And every time she did, she'd feel that familiar warmth in her chest, the kind that said love never really leaves. One evening, as she studied for a biology test at the kitchen table, she looked up and saw him watching her from the doorway, a soft smile on his face. What? She asked, smiling back. Nothing, he said. Just, you remind me of her sometimes. Not in looks. In spirit, that fire. That kindness, she didn't flinch. Didn't feel like a replacement. Because now she understood love wasn't a finite thing. It didn't run out. It multiplied. Abuela's love was still with her. His daughter's memory was honored in the way he lived now. And his love for her? It was its own thing, steady, patient, growing deeper with every shared meal, every late-night talk, every "I'm proud of you." Years later, when she walked across the stage in a white coat, freshly graduated from medical school, stethoscope around her neck, he was in the front row, clapping louder than anyone, tears in his eyes. Afterward, she ran to him and he hugged her so tight she could feel his heartbeat against hers. "You did it," he whispered. "We did it," she corrected. And she meant it. Every step, the alley, the shelter, the lake, the courtroom, the long nights of studying had led here. Not because she was special, but because someone chose to believe in her when she couldn't believe in herself. Now, as a doctor, she worked in a community clinic, the kind that never turned anyone away. She kept a small photo on her desk, a 12-year-old girl with tired eyes and a tattered scarf, standing beside a man in a wheelchair, both of them smiling like they'd just discovered a secret the whole world had forgotten. On hard days, when the weight of the world felt too heavy, she'd touch the locket around her neck, now filled with 2 photos. Abuela on one side, her and Dad on the other, and remember the snow, the blood, the whisper. Remember that kindness changes everything, and most of all, remember that sometimes the person you save is the one who saves you back.